Almost overnight, she went from a possible witness to a person of interest in the case of a missing mom of 5 from New Canaan. The girlfriend in the middle of a bitter and brutal divorce battle.
The stuff you were throwing out, we have. And it's all Jennifer. It belongs to Jennifer. Do you understand?
Turned high-profile murder investigation.
Guys, what happened to Jennifer McLaughlin?
We're taking you inside the trial of Michelle Troconis.
And thanks for joining us once again for Inside the Trial of Michelle Troconis. I'm Shannon Miller. We are heading into day 20 of the trial and waiting to hear where the state goes next after Pawel Gumienny's testimony. The former employee of Fotis Doulos' company, the 4 Group, started his second day of the testimony, walking the jury through that 80 Mountain Spring Road timeline. And also walking the jury through this surveillance video showing part of the shuffling around of vehicles on May 24th, 2019, the last day Jennifer was seen alive. Now the spotlight also on John Schoenhorn as he got the chance to cross-examine one of the state's most critical witnesses in this case, and the defendant watching intently as the man who she once rode dirt bikes with testified against her. Michelle Troconis continues to maintain her innocence and has pleaded not guilty to all charges. Our Kevin Geis joins us live outside Sanford Superior Court once again, Kevin, and we are coming off of a very crucial day for the defense.
Absolutely. The focus for most of the day was on John Schoenhorn, at times almost taking as much heat as the witness himself, Pawel Gumienny. Now, this was a critical day of cross-examination for John Schoenhorn. Once the prosecution wrapped up its direct questioning of Pawel Gumienny, it was Schoenhorn's turn, and he grilled the former 4 Group employee for hours on the days leading up to and the days following Jennifer going missing. He called into question Gumienny's credibility for the jury, pushing him on his memory of events and interviews, and he almost attempted to clarify some profane statements Gumienny alleges Michelle made about Jennifer Doulos before and after her disappearance.
That bitch should be buried next to the dog. That's your testimony, right?
Correct.
And you said that it was an effort, you saw it as an effort for Miss Troconis to cheer up Fotis, right?
That's how I understood.
So like as a joke, right? A sick joke, but still a joke, right?
I wouldn't call it a joke, but yeah.
Well, you're cheering somebody up with some humor, right?
Not that kind of humor, but yeah.
Gumienny's testimony wrapped up at the end of the day. It's still unclear who the state plans to call for their next witness. Shannon.
All right, Kevin, I want to go back to those profane statements Gumienny testified that Michelle Troconis made in reference to Jennifer Doulos. According to Gumienny's testimony, Troconis said she would do something to Jennifer when she turns up. Attorney John Schoenhorn brought that up during cross-examination.
She said she is playing games, right? Her picture and my picture are on the internet, right?
Yes.
And then she said, I'm going to kill that bee when she turns up. Isn't that what she said to you?
Yes.
You thought she might turn up, Miss Doulos, didn't you, at that point?
Yes.
You believed Mr. Doulos when he had said that, you know, she may have just disappeared and run away, correct?
Yes.
And he told you she had done it before, right?
Yes.
So, Kevin, Attorney John Schoenhorn here attempting to tamp down those comments, spending some time and giving them attention. You know, my thought here, Kevin, in all this, again, is what, again, was the impression that Michelle and Gumienny had at this point? Again, they thought that she could simply be missing, or in Michelle's words, hiding, right?
Right, Schoenhorn used this as a chance to sort of add some context or clarity to some of the comments. The first one, more as a joke. He admits it was a sick joke, but again, he doubles down on it being a joke to sort of cheer up Fotis Doulos. And then the second comment, sort of putting Gumienny and Michelle in the same camp, both believing at the time that Jennifer Doulos was simply missing, that nothing had happened to her, and certainly that Fotis Doulos had not done anything to her himself.
So, Kevin, the jury got its first glimpse of when Gumienny was brought into an interrogation room by state police. Unlike the videos we saw of Michelle Troconis' first two interviews, which were played in full, the defense just showed a still image of the short interview. He had gone to State Police Troop G in Bridgeport in an effort to pick up his Toyota Tacoma, which had been seized by them. He then learned that he would never get the truck back, and he was never compensated for it.
And what is that in your left hand on the table that we see in this image?
It's oil can.
That was the oil can you brought, because if you were going to take your vehicle, it would have probably drained out unless you put in oil, right?
I was planning on being very safe and sorry, so I took some oil with me, yes.
You had to put in a lot of oil because you knew it had been dripping, right?
Yeah.
Now, when he learned that he was not getting his truck back, police then wanted to ask Pawel Gumienny some questions. He said he didn't want to answer any questions without his lawyer there, so police ended that interview. Now, Schoenhorn also brought up Gumienny's phone, a strategy, he said, during an objection on relevance directly tied to the credibility of the witness. He says when the police first asked for his phone, Gumienny called his attorney, who said not to turn it over without a warrant.
From what I remember, Mr. Russo said, no, they need a warrant. They can seize it, but they can't search it until they have a warrant. And I explained to Mr. Russo that I have nothing to hide, and I want him to download my phone. This is how I remember it.
Now, Kevin, you spoke with attorney Lindy Orso, who was present in the courtroom throughout Gumienny's testimony, and he said that he later agreed it was fine for him to hand over that phone and that police were going to get it anyway. What else did he have to say about his client?
Right, so Lindy Urso pointed out that Pawel Gumienny was incredibly cooperative, start to finish, throughout this entire process, and he really tried to make sure that he was offering everything he possibly could to investigators and was offering them full testimony, answering statements. Urso actually pulled him back a few times just to sort of go through some of the formalities that ultimately landed him immunity for the trial. But he also pointed out at the end of the day that he was just glad that this testimony was over with.
It's been very difficult. The whole thing's been very difficult the last 5 years. I think the last 2 days, again, are sort of mixed because he hates the spotlight. He's a very private individual, but by the same token, we're here now, and this is the beginning of the end of the circus for him, so he can get back to his life in a couple of days.
Beginning of the end of the circus for him. He's glad this testimony is over with so that he can go back to just focusing on his family and his work. Shannon.
Now, Kevin, attorney Schoenhorn brought up Gumienny's green card in his cross-examination as well. As we have said, Gumienny is a native of Poland who came to the U.S. in 2000 and then got a green card. Attorney Judge Schoenhorn asked him about police bringing his immigration status up during questioning.
That if they wanted to really mess with your green card, they could just make a phone call.
Yes.
But they said that's not what they were looking to have happen, right?
I'm going to object, Your Honor. Calls for speculation as to what other people were looking to have happen.
No. This is what was said to the witness.
Well, if the representation is that the police later said after that they are not looking for that to happen, then the court will allow it.
Yes.
They did say that to you. Right. So, were you nervous about them bringing up your green card status?
Yes.
You weren't a U.S. citizen, were you?
No.
Are you now?
Yes.
That's happened since 2019, correct?
Correct.
If you had been arrested for anything, you knew you could have been deported, right?
Correct.
And you'd lived here for what, 20 years at that point? 19 years?
19 years.
And you were concerned, right?
Correct.
Now, on Tuesday, Gumienny testified that Fotis Doulos told him if he went to the police that they would deport him. Attorney Judge Schoenhorn showed surveillance video from the home in New Canaan Gumienny was working on at 61 Sturbridge Hill. Now, Troconis' attorney pressed Gumienny on what he did on May 24th, trying to highlight inconsistencies. Schoenhorn insisted that Gumienny didn't return to the house after getting lunch and asked him what he remembered about the lunch.
What did you have for lunch at that Chinese restaurant?
I don't remember.
What did the person who served you look like?
I don't remember.
Did you do anything else while you were down in New Canaan on May 24th, 2019 in the afternoon?
I believe I was just working at the house and possibly went for lunch and came back.
You didn't go anywhere else?
No reason.
What street was this Chinese restaurant on?
I don't remember.
Remember, do you ever go there before?
Yes.
Do you remember the name of it?
No.
Now, on Tuesday, Attorney McGinnis, Kevin, asked Gumienny about his recollection of events from nearly 5 years ago and how they may be a little fuzzy. Kevin, it's the strategy of any good defense to try to attack the credibility of a witness. I got to tell you, I don't know what I had for lunch on Monday, much less several years ago. So can you talk more about that and that strategy?
Right, so John Schoenhorn just continued to sort of poke holes in what Gumienny's account was of May 24th. But from the prosecutor's side, they sort of continued to push back on that narrative and sort of offer Gumienny the chance to remind the jury that this was just a normal day for him at work. He wasn't necessarily thinking anything was going on May 24th, according to his testimony. So this was just a normal day. So it would be hard for him to remember exactly the details of May 24th, 2019, especially 5 years later.
All right, also coming up on cross-examination, the custody report that we have heard Michelle Troconis mention in her interviews with police. Attorney John Schoenhorn asked Gumienny about Fotis's mood at the time.
He seemed to be very happy about the way things were coming out. And he was telling you that, right?
He mentioned something like that to me, yes.
And you told that to the police as well, didn't you?
Yes.
And he had told you that there was a really good custody report that had just come out, right?
What do you mean by custody report?
A report about who would get custody of the children. He told you that, didn't he?
I believe he told me that there's a pretty good chance of him getting full custody of the kids.
Now, Schoenhorn read an earlier statement Gumienny made to police saying Fotis Dulos was only talking about the divorce in recent weeks. That was all he was talking about, and that it was either very good or very bad. So, Kevin, this custody report keeps coming back up in testimony, and we know again that that particular report ordered by Jennifer Dulos has been sealed. But Fotis was excited about it. At least that's what he was telling Michelle and Pawel. Why would the defense bring this up again?
Right, it's unclear if we'll ever get a chance to actually see this report or if it's going to come into court. But Schoenhorn refers to this report as sort of a motive killer. So Fotis had everyone in his circle believing that this report was a good thing. So why would he do anything to Jennifer to jeopardize the possibility of him getting his kids? So the defense continues to sort of raise it as that motive killer.
Well, the day started with some direct questioning from state prosecutors. Gumienny was asked about these still images captured from the surveillance cameras of what he believed was his red Toyota Tacoma. You'll remember from previous testimony, investigators were very interested in what was in that truck bed. Here's what Gumienny had to say about that.
There appears to be an object in the bed of the vehicle. Did you, when you dropped your Toyota Tacoma off at 4 Jefferson Crossing, in other words, the last time you had possessed it prior to taking it back on the 24th, was there anything in the bed of your vehicle?
Other than bungee cords and tie-down straps that I use for tie-down dirt bike. They should not be used.
Nothing that resembled this object here, correct?
No.
Prosecutors also mention a bicycle owned by Fotis Dulos before ending his questioning. It's hard to say where the state takes the case next, Kevin, but the bike, what was in the Tacoma truck bed, are still unanswered questions for the jury. And Kevin, we always appreciate your insight. We'll let you get back up to court, and we'll check back in with you next time. Much more to come inside the trial. Michelle Troconis coming up. The comings and goings of the vehicles and the people involved, a big part of this case. Former State Police Commissioner spokesperson Brian Foley going to walk us through all of this when we come back. And welcome back to Inside the Trial of Michelle Troconis. We are joined once again by one of our analysts for the trial, Brian Foley, former spokesperson for the Connecticut State Police throughout the Jennifer Dulos investigation. Welcome back, Brian. A lot to unpack for the jury when it comes to this particular testimony. Pawel Gumienny, a huge part of that, this TikTok kind of sort of back and forth timeline of the comings and goings of that 80 Mountain Spring property the day that Jennifer disappeared.
A lot of video, yep.
A lot of video. This is that 11,000 square foot mansion that Fotis Dulos was set to show the next day to a potential buyer. Why was this so important to establish this for the jury, this particular property?
You know, well, it's a big sprawling property, and as you know, it was searched a lot during the investigation. So, and it kind of pins them all there, and that's kind of the center, aside from New Canaan, kind of the center up here of where everything is really located. So, very important to establish everybody there. Yeah,
and that surveillance video really captured the comings and goings there of that day. It's important. You've got to admit it's a little bit confusing to keep track of. So we want to take our viewers kind of through all of this that was presented so far. First off, there are a lot of different vehicles and properties involved in this investigation. Take us through these 4 cars here that have to do with Fotis Dulos, Michelle Troconis, and Pawel Gumienny.
So I think the most important one, obviously, is the Toyota Tacoma. Yep. And there's a lot of odd things, and we'll get into that in a little while. But if you look at the Ford Raptor and the Chevy Suburban and that Jeep, these are newer vehicles. Mm-hmm. And these types of vehicles now have GPS data in almost like a black box in a plane that police are going to use and try to search as best they can for them. The minute you walk into these cars, your phone connects to these cars, and now we're sharing information with your phone. So I think as the trial unfolds here, you're going to see a lot of information coming out of that. Highly unlikely there's one of those in that Toyota Tacoma.
And that's how they said they were able to rule out the Raptor, too, going down to New Canaan because, in fact, that had the infotainment center in there. I want to pick things up with what Gumienny testified about when he showed up at 80 Mountain Spring Road the day that Jennifer Dulos had gone missing. This is a Farmington property. He showed up in the afternoon, and Gumienny, again, was trying to figure out where Fotis Dulos was that afternoon, right?
Yep.
So what exactly was he trying to do that afternoon? He was trying to make contact with him, or was he getting a hold of Fotis at all?
So you got to figure. Now, look, I'm under the impression that Fotis did this, and I have little doubt in my mind. So now we're trying to unfold Michelle and Gumienny's role in this. So. That's what we really want to know is what's going on here, and how did he contact Fotis? What was his contact with Fotis, and how much did he know? He's been granted immunity, which is very important here, but we need to know what he knew, and he's been cooperative with police from the beginning, but that doesn't always mean truthful. You know, everyone approaches things differently, but they did get a lot of useful information out of him, obviously.
He even testified it sounded like Michelle and Fotis were a bit surprised when he showed up at the Mountain Spring Road property. I want to get now to surveillance. And we'll talk about kind of that moment. This surveillance video from across the street of 80 Mountain Spring Road was key for you guys. That's when Gumienny arrives in the Ford Raptor. It's worth to point out, again, the timestamp on this video, almost a little more than a day ahead. Again, this was just around 5 o'clock there. So this is critical surveillance video when it comes to, again, verifying Gumienny's story, right?
Yeah, so a lot of these videos here are to do just that and verify that he's telling the truth and establish his credibility with the jury. And each time they show these videos, there might be some redundancy in it, but again, it's showing verification of what he has said.
So they're all at the 80 Mountain Spring Road property. Gumienny again shows up. He finds the 2 of them there. They act a little bit surprised, and he wants them to all then drive over to Dulos's Jefferson Crossing property. This is about 2 miles away. Drop off one of the vehicles and come back and get the Tacoma. Here's a map here of that distance between those 2 properties. So here is all the video of surveillance of them leaving 80 Mountain Spring Road. Gumienny leaves first in the Ford Raptor, as you saw. Now you can see that the other 2 vehicles are pulling out. The white Jeep about 40 seconds later, followed again by Fotis in the Suburban. So they all leave. This is around 5:02 p.m. to go to Dulos's Jefferson Crossing home. Then there's this like 20-minute gap or so where we don't see or hear about the defendant, Michelle Troconis, where she was at this point. She is seen leaving in the white Jeep, and she told Gumienny that she had to check on something about carpets. So she's saying, I've got to go, I've got to take off. And then after that, we actually see the Ford Raptor return to 80 Mountain Spring Road. Gumienny testified that he and Fotis Dulos were inside of it then, and that's what he was told. the Tacoma keys were missing, which is key, and that Troconis had them. So, Brian, why did investigators think it was interesting that Michelle Troconis was holding on to the Tacoma keys?
Well, I think what the point is, what's the jury going to think of why is she holding on to the keys? And as an investigator, you think she's cleaning up the truck. And so looking at all these videos and listening to Gumienny, sounds like he just wants his stuff back and just wants to get it back. And she has to know, something. And that's what I think they're trying to establish as a jury. So much movement, so many cars moving back and forth. Why would she possibly want to drive that Toyota Tacoma when you got the Raptor, the Bourbon, and the Jeep?
He had just seen those keys, too, out the passenger side of the Tacoma when he was leaving, so he's thinking, where in the world did they go? Here's the next time Gumienny sees Michelle Troconis after Doulos calls her to have him bring those keys. She returns to 80 Mountain Spring in the Suburban. This was around 5:23 that night. So, Brian, do we know how or, again, why she decided to switch vehicles? It's really confusing why they decided to drive which vehicle.
We don't, and it is confusing. And so this is what is establishing a lot of reasonable doubt in the minds of the jury. This is not the average movement of the average person. All these shuffling of cars, all the moving back and forth from addresses. How could she not know something is going on here? But when you tie in, like I said, that Tacoma and that she had the keys, something really is going to stick in the jury's head about that, I believe. And all this movement, it's not how average people work on an average day.
And remember, they had said we were cleaning the property. So then we see the vehicles all leave 80 Mountain Spring once again. First, Michelle Troconis in the Suburban, Pawel Gumienny in the Tacoma, and then Fotis Doulos in the Raptor. This was around 5:37 p.m., and we're unsure at this point where Troconis goes next. But according to Gumienny's testimony, he says he went with Fotis Doulos to the 585 Deer Cliff property. That's in Avon, where they dropped off the Tacoma there. There's a map of where that is in comparison to Mountain Spring. From there, he says he rode in the Ford Raptor back to Jefferson Crossing, where Gumienny's dirt bike was. He had trouble starting it, but eventually got it going. And he says that they then rode back the dirt bike to his Tacoma on Deer Cliff, loaded the bike onto his truck, and then went home. This is a lot. The final piece of video that police found to corroborate Gumienny's stories, surveillance video here from a neighboring property on Deer Cliff Road. You can see that dirt bike in the Tacoma as he drives home. So, Brian, what should the jury take away from all of this?
So that last video you saw is one big piece of corroboration. But when you look at that map, it fits within a lot of the timelines. But also think about how much the cops had to search when you have a missing person and where you have to look and move around. And a lot of sprawling properties there to go through, but I think we've established a lot of suspicion for sure about Michelle Troconis with these 4 vehicles and the movings around.
And that's only at 5 o'clock that afternoon. There was a lot more that the jury is about to learn earlier in the day between Michelle and Fotis coming from those properties. Much more coming up with Brian, including a piece of this evidence, surveillance video here that we're waiting to learn more about. Brand new details we just learned this morning about a question Fotis Doulos had for his neighbor regarding his Ring camera. And welcome back to Inside the Trial of Michelle Troconis. We are joined once again with former Connecticut State Police spokesperson during the investigation of Jennifer Doulos, Brian Foley. One piece of the residential surveillance video that we have not seen in full yet is this view from across the street on Jefferson Crossing. We saw a portion of it last week, and you've got some insight in this. Again, we only saw this moment here, which appears to be the Ford Raptor coming in to the Jefferson Crossing property. This was later on in the night on May 24th. You told me this morning a new piece of information I've never heard about. Investigators found out that Fotis Doulos was very curious about these cameras of his neighbor.
The Ring cameras, aren't they great? And so great for homicide detectives in this day and age and that evidence. And this is just fantastic evidence. But yes, Fotis Doulos, following this, went around to at least one neighbor asking, hey, they're saying something along the lines of, hey, I want to get some security cameras or maybe a Ring camera for my front door. Do you happen to have one on your front door? And this is the one across the street of the woman who testified on day 14, I believe, last week about, and that's how they got the video.
Okay.
You know, so this is all establishing, guilt or the appearance of guilt in this whole situation when you're knocking on neighbors' doors asking, hey, do you got a Ring camera by any chance? When you can see it from the street.
Right. And we also learned in testimony that he was actually asking one of his audio video contractors too about Jennifer's New Canaan property. So, you know, looking at these motion sensors, is that a camera? Is
Yep.
that a camera?
Yep.
So photos became very curious about what the cameras may or may not have seen his comings and goings around the day of May 24th. Brian, incredible insight in all of this.
Thanks.
So many moving parts. That visual surveillance, such a key part of this investigation. Those investigators must have poured through hours
A lot of
over.
work.
We will have you back once again to break down
Thanks.
all of our exclusive insight. We appreciate you being with us once again on Inside the Trial of Michelle Troconis.